Welcome to the Ionic 4 tutorial. In this video, you'll learn how to set up a multi-step tutorial for new users that sign up for your app for the first time. This feature is actually pretty easy to build, but we'll cover some really important concepts that will make your life a lot easier as an Ionic developer. If you're new here, like and subscribe, and the feature we're building is actually part of my Ionic 4 course, which will be coming out in the next week or two, and is available for free to pro members. So let's go ahead and start by taking a closer look at this app tutorial. Basically, it's just 3 slides that tell the user what this app is all about. And there's a couple more advanced things that you're not seeing right off the bat. One is we're using an Angular router guard to determine whether or not to display the tutorial. We're using Ionic storage to handle the state between sessions. And we're also using the viewChild directive from Angular to be able to grab a component from the DOM and use its API methods. And we'll also jump into some CSS code to make sure that our tutorial slides look good on all platforms. The first thing you'll need is an Ionic 4 app. It doesn't matter if you have an existing app or a brand new one. The only thing we'll need is a new page to serve as our tutorial, so we can just generate that with the Ionic CLI. That command will generate a lazy loaded page for us called tutorial. So let's go ahead and open up the app router and take a look at it. In my demo here, you can see I have the root path, and then I also have this new tutorial path. And the goal is to route the user to the tutorial if they haven't already completed it, which generally means that they're a brand new user that has just installed this app. The way we'll determine whether or not a user has completed the tutorial is by using Ionic storage to persist this information locally. I recommend using Ionic storage here because it will use the right storage mechanism depending on the platform, whether it's the web, iOS, or Android. The docs will give you a couple of commands to install the packages. Then you'll want to go into your app module in Angular and import the Ionic storage module for root. So that gives us a way to store information between sessions. The next thing we'll do is generate an Angular guard. Let's go ahead and open up the command line, and then we'll run Ionic generate guard. And I'll put that in a folder called guards, and we'll give this the name of the tutorial guard. And what this guard will do is allow us to isolate the logic for which users need to complete the tutorial and which ones are allowed to go directly into the app. A guard is just an Angular service, but it has a special canActivate method that we implement to determine whether or not a user can activate a route. The method itself just needs to return a Boolean value, and it can also be a promise of a Boolean or an observable of a Boolean. Ionic storage is a promise-based API, so we'll have our canActivate method return a promise. Then we're also going to inject 2 services in the constructor, Ionic storage and the Angular router. The next change I'll make is that I will change canActivate to an async method to ensure that it returns a promise. Now the logic we need to implement here is to determine if the user has completed the tutorial. And for that, we're going to save a property in our local storage called tutorial complete, which will either be true or false. We'll actually set this property when we get to the slides, but for now we just need to read it, and then if the user has not completed the tutorial, we want to redirect them to that tutorial route. So we can say if isComplete is false, we'll have the router navigate by URL to the tutorial route. That takes care of the guard logic. The next step is to apply it to an actual route. And the great thing about guards is that you can use them on multiple routes. So in this case, we only have one, but if we had multiple routes, we could apply the same guard and just reuse this logic in a very dry way. In most cases, you'll set up your guards with the canActivate property. So we'll say canActivate with an array and pass it our tutorial guard class name. And the reason that's an array is because you can actually apply multiple guards to a single route as well. That wraps up all of our routing logic. Now we'll go ahead and grab the slides component from Ionic and start building out this actual tutorial UI. For now, I'll just go ahead and copy and paste the slides component directly into our tutorial page. If we serve the app, we should get something that looks similar to this. I did customize some of the CSS, so yours will probably look a little bit different. We'll get to the CSS a little bit later, but I'll show you how to set up custom fonts in a future video. For each slide, I'm going to replace the text with an SVG graphic. I'm going to use the Ion image component, which is just like a regular HTML image, but with some additional special features for Ionic. I'd recommend saving these directly in the assets folder so they get compiled with your native mobile app so there's no loading issues if the user's offline. Then we can repeat that process for each slide, and I'm also going to give each slide its own CSS class so we can style it with a unique background color. We can just go ahead and call those step 1, step 2, and step 3. Now I'm going to switch gears to the CSS because you'll likely need to make some modifications to get this responsive on all devices, and this will depend on the actual format of your tutorial. But in my case, I wanted each slide to fill the entire height of the viewport. Then most components are flexbox based in Ionic, so in this case we can set the flex direction to column so the content flows from top to bottom. We'll need to set a max width and height for our Ion image, otherwise it's going to try and fill up the entire viewport. Then the other interesting thing that we'll do is set up different background colors for each one of our slides. If you're not familiar with CSS variables, I recommend checking out my Ionic theme video, but it's pretty simple. We just have some global CSS variables that represent colors, and then we can set them as the properties on our various classes. So we'll just set the background for our different slides as the primary color, success color, and dark color. Now if we go ahead and serve the app, you can see that our slides are looking a lot more unique with our icons and custom colors. But currently there's no way to finish the tutorial. The user would just be stuck on this page forever. What we're going to do is implement a couple different buttons here. One, I'm going to give the option for the user to click next so I can show you how to use this component's API. And then on the last slide, I'll do a button for finish that allows the user to complete the tutorial. This logic will be handled in the component TypeScript, and we'll need to have Ionic storage as well as the Angular router. Those get injected in the constructor, and then we'll need to implement a method called finish that will set the storage property to true so we know that the user has completed the tutorial. We can make this an async function, and then we'll go ahead and await the storage to set the property of tutorial complete to true. And if you remember from earlier, that's the property that the guard is looking for to determine whether or not to activate the main route. Once we know that that property has been set, we can use the router to navigate back to the root route, and this time the guard will activate it. So this means that if the user completes the tutorial, then they refresh the window or close the app and reopen it, they won't have to go back and redo the tutorial every single time. And that brings me to the final topic of this video, which is slightly more advanced, and that is how do we use the actual API for this component? Because you'll notice it has a whole bunch of different methods in the docs, but how do you use an API on a component that's just declared in the HTML? And that's where Angular's viewChild directive comes into play. What we want to do is grab this component from the HTML and then be able to use the methods on it to create a button that allows the user to click next or back, or there's a whole bunch of other different things you could do as well. The first thing we'll do is import the slides component from Ionic Angular, and then we'll set up the viewChild decorator here in the component itself, and we'll pass in the slides class. Then we'll set that as a property, and we'll strong type it to slides. And that's really all there is to it. As long as that component lives in the HTML, we can now access all of its API methods. On the first and second slide, we have a next button, and to make that next button actually work, we can just call slides slide next. And if you want to get more advanced with this, you can actually determine which slide is active to run animations or just do different things behind the scenes. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up there. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe. And if you want to take your Ionic development to the next level, consider becoming a pro member at angularfirebase.com. You'll get a free copy of my book, as well as a whole bunch of exclusive resources designed to help you build and ship your app faster. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.